Hi there, Jeff here from the Wetsuit Centre, talking to you today about the Billabong Xero Revolution 5.4 winter wetsuit for 2013 to 2014. So, the Billabong Revolution, always being tinkered with, historically, by Billabong through the years, but to be honest with you, it stayed pretty much the same, except the actual quality of the neoprene and the jersey on the neoprene as last year. But the actual sort of cut and the principles of the wetsuit are pretty much the same. They have dropped the sort of gradient, which is the sort of graphics on the outside of the wetsuit, and we've got more of a traditional black, but I believe you can get a bit more of a crazy wetsuit as well, for those of you that like a bit of colour and patterns. Okay, but essentially the Billabong Revolution, very similar price point to last year, and very similar wetsuit technically in terms of last year as well. It's a winter wetsuit, so for those of you who aren't sort of aware of the weight or the thickness of a winter wetsuit, it's 5mm on the lower body. If I show you the actual quality, the sort of thickness of the fibre, it's quite useful because it does vary massively between companies. So it's quite accurate 5mm. Some of them are more like a 7, so they're quite heavy. But that's a good sort of 5mm, and then 4mm on the wrists. It doesn't really help. They've got a pinched cuff there on the wrist. So, basically, the suit itself, as I said before, is quite similar to last year. The actual difference for me is the quality of neoprene and the fact that it's got recycled property, recycled materials on the wetsuit, and that's actually pretty much like the jersey of the neoprene of the wetsuit. So the actual material that goes over the top of the rubber, the neoprene itself. I'll show you that in a second because it's really evident on the inside of the suit. It's quite fluffy, and I think it'll actually have some insulating properties, and it definitely will feel really, really comfortable as well. So essentially, the Billabong Revolution then, so it's all about flexibility, this suit. It's a performance wetsuit, so you could have loads of things which weigh it down, like loads of thermal lining. You could have lots of things like liquid taping inside and outside the wetsuit, but what they do is they try and get a good balance between flexibility and warmth. Okay, you don't have a smooth skin panel on this wetsuit. Instead, what you have is an unbroken panel of neoprene the whole way through the front, and right the way through the lumbar and lower part of the wetsuit and around the back as well. The idea of that, it promotes more flexibility, less seams, more flexibility. Okay, you get that the whole way through the suit, so it will feel great when it's on. Okay, downside to that is obviously you haven't got that smooth material on the front, which does help keep the wind out of the suit a little bit better. Okay, so that's the only downside. So it's all about flex. You've got huge panels on the neoprene across the front and back of the wetsuit to make sure there's less restriction. Further down, you've got the standard Duraflex knee pads. It's like a puffed out knee pad basically, which locks around your knee, feels good, and will actually sort of help give a longer shelf life to the suit as well because it's less prone to wear through. Around the back of the knees as well, you've got kind of an embossed thing around the back of the knees just to sort of give you a bit more flex and allow it to sort of bend around the back of the knees a bit better. So all these things are kind of thought about. Now in terms of the seams of the wetsuit, now you've got what we call standard glued and blind stitch seams on the wrist. What that means is basically the neoprene is stitched halfway through on the outside of the wetsuit, and then it is glued to the inside just to create a seal, make sure no water comes through, and then around the sort of critical stress points you get a bit of liquid taping as well, just to lock it against your wrist and to make sure it doesn't rip apart around the wrist where it might be more prone to as well. You get that throughout the suit, which I'll show you when we turn it inside out. But one thing you get on top of that as well with this particular suit is you get what we call the good old-fashioned liquid taping. So on some of the more expensive suits, you will have noticed this has got thinner and thinner, okay, which basically gives more flexibility, but might be more prone to break apart as well. So this is more of like the traditional liquid taping, which goes over the top of the seam and just make sure that it's not going to pull apart, and it's definitely not going to leak any water because it's pretty much impossible to get through that. So that's through the whole way through the suit. You get that liquid taping, apart from on the lower part of the arm where you might need a bit more flex. That's why they bend the seams as well, just to make sure there's no restriction through the suit. So that's what the suit's all about. It's sort of a balance between flexibility and warmth as well, and keeping water out of the wetsuit. So they're all positive points. I think the liquid taping can be a bit restrictive personally, but with this particular suit, because they have thought about where they place it, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Okay, and it's only on the outside of the wetsuit as well, so I don't think it will be a negative thing. I think it'll be really positive with this particular suit. Okay, and you can even see in the lower part of the legs there, they've dropped the liquid taping to make it easy to get your feet through, give you a bit more flex in the lower leg. Okay, this particular suit is a chest entry suit. Getting more popular, the chest entries, and Billabong do it very well because they're a bit better at keeping out water because you've got an unbroken seam around your collar, or unbroken seal around your collar. and also you've got no back zip on the wetsuit, which frees up the whole back panel, means you've got a bit more flex through the back of the panel of the suit as well. I think the style of the suit looks really nice as well. It's probably Billabong's best looking suit in my personal opinion. It's got a bit of logoing around there and around the front. Okay, now that dip around there is the actual chest zip. Now what happens here is the chest zip is actually sewn over the wetsuit itself. So the wetsuit comes up to nice and high on the collar, and basically the chest zip is sewn to the outside of it, on the outside, meaning that it goes over the top. So any water that does come in through the side or through the collar, instead of going into the wetsuit, is met with the actual wetsuit itself and channeled out either through the chest zip, through the drain holes at the front here, or through the drain holes on the lower lumbar or lower back region. That's dipped really low as well, just to make sure you've got no restriction around the upper body, around the shoulders as well. Because for me, the shoulders are the most important part to keep unencumbered and free with lots of movement. Okay, so you get that on the upper part of the suit there as well, so it's nicely thought about from Blue. Downsides for me, always going to be a downside. This is just a personal thing, but basically, I did mention on the other suit as well, but basically the collar with the Billabong, they pre-dip it basically. They dip the collar underneath the Adam's apple, and what they do is they pinch it as well. Okay, so it's a very thin, very sort of soft, basically, seal around the neck. Now the benefit of that is obviously it's very, very comfortable and less likely to sort of feel restrictive and choking around your neck. But for me, I found it's a little bit more prone to flush throughs because it's so low and it's kind of hasn't got that strength around the collar. You are more prone if you sort of fall off or if you sort of duck dive a heavy wave and get a bit smashed, then you're more likely to get a bit more of a flush through that. I didn't like that. I thought it was better just to have a bit more restriction there, but ultimately keep more water out of the wetsuit. But that's a personal opinion, and it'd be good to hear sort of people's feedback on that on the old YouTube comments, should you sort of have any experience with that sort of dipped collar. You get it around the wrist as well. And for me it's the same thing, where you don't have that tightness around the wrist, feels great, easy to get on, but more inclined to sort of like fold back if you fall off and sort of get a bit more flush up the wrist than other wetsuits that I've tried on. So that's my only gripe about this suit, but that might be something that people actually like about the wetsuit, so you never know. Okay, so we turn this inside out, the Xero Revolution. We will have a little look inside the wetsuit and see what's going on there. And which brings me to this sort of AXR, this neoprene is called. Now, I think they call it the AXR because the R stands for recycling, basically, but that won't be the actual neoprene itself that's recycled, it's the jersey. So the part of this sort of, that goes on the outside of the neoprene, the coat set, which is the part that sits against your skin. And it is noticeably different, this stuff, because it's really, really fluffy. Almost feels like thermal material the whole way through the wetsuit. So it's going to feel really, really comfortable. It's really soft against your skin. And I think it might actually, because it's almost like polypro anyway, this sort of stuff, the whole way through the suit. How much that will sort of, it's going to be non-absorbent, so it shouldn't be too heavy and restrictive, but I guess it will have effect on the sort of weight of the suit. Again, interesting to hear about sort of people's feedback on that. But essentially it's kind of like a fluffy material, feels really, really good against the skin. It doesn't boast that it has any thermal properties, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did, because it doesn't really feel too much different to the actual thermal lining that's highlighted in orange here. And that's the part that's meant to be the actual thermal material, which is sort of a polypro thermal heat retaining lining around your kidneys to keep them warm, keep your blood warm, keeps your blood flow warm, keeps your body warm. You only get that around the kidneys, but throughout the whole suit you get this AXR sort of lining, and it's very soft and quite fluffy to the touch. I think the suit will feel fantastic when it's on, and I think it will actually psychologically make you feel a lot warmer. Whole way through the front of the suit, and all the seams are obviously taped with that sort of like round dotting of taping, just to make sure that they don't rip apart, all of the seams. And then you've got the liquid taping around the sort of upper part of the chest there as well, just to reinforce it a little bit more. Okay, so there's everything pretty much going on inside the Xero Revolution this year. Be interesting to hear people's sort of feedback about the collar and sort of lining on the wetsuit. But essentially, it does feel fantastic. It's really, really lightweight, flexible wetsuit, and they're already popular. We're selling these very well this year, so definitely something good about the suit that people are enjoying, and it's going to be one of the sort of best mid-range wetsuits I think on the market for this year. So the Billabong Revolution.